Right now, immigration reform picks up some momentum in the U.S. Senate this week. We'll explain why. And next, are casinos a good or bad bet for New York? We may be on our way to allowing more gambling right here in the Garden State. And later, Anthony Weiner getting some unflattering headlines again, but this time it's not for what he said, but apparently for what he didn't say. Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Andrew Whitman in one more night for Richard French. Thanks so much for joining us on this Friday evening, June 21st. We begin tonight with immigration reform. The Senate's bipartisan immigration reform plan picking up some momentum this week. Three major factors helped give the plan a little extra steam. One, a border security agreement was reached. The agreement would almost double the number of federal agents along the U.S.-Mexico border. It would also require construction of 700 miles of border fencing and provide money for aerial drones. Funding for the additional border agents will cost about $30 billion. Senator Bob Corker was instrumental in crafting the border security amendment.
If this amendment passes, which I hope that it will, I don't know how anybody could argue that the reason they're not supporting this legislation is because we haven't addressed securing the border.
Also this week, the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office concluded that the bill would slash the deficit by approximately $200 billion over the next decade, something Senator Chuck Schumer called, quote, a huge momentum boost. That got the attention of House Speaker John Boehner, who still maintains the Senate bill is still not adequate, but he did have to concede that the report made the immigration reform package look more appealing.
If, in fact, those numbers are anywhere close to being accurate, would be a real boon for the country.
And finally, who saw this coming? Conservative commentator Bill O'Reilly issued an endorsement of the immigration plan.
The Republican Party has a lot to lose here. If it doesn't compromise, many Hispanic voters will reject the GOP entirely, pretty much dooming the party in the future. That's reality. It is time for the USA to pass immigration reform. For years, I've called for a more secure southern border. You know that. And now it looks like the secure border is in reach, at least somewhat. So I hope this bill does become law.
Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid says he wants the immigration bill voted on before the July 4th recess, perhaps as early as next Thursday. But even if the bill passes in the Senate, it's still going to face a tough battle in the House. Let's bring in our panel on this. We joined by Bill O'Reilly, not that one, this one. Bill O'Reilly, Republican consultant and executive vice president at NLO Strategies. Dominic Carter, political journalist and author. And Evan Stavisky is here, a Democratic strategist and partner at the Parkside Group. Gentlemen, all, thank you for being with us. Let's start with this apparent deal on border security, $30 billion. I thought we were cutting spending all over the place. Is this just a payoff to get some Republican support for the bill in general?
I think it may be, and on the border security, I mean, they could build a wall all the way, you know, the Great Wall of China on the border of Mexico, but people are going to go under it. I mean, I don't know that the border security is really going to be real there. I think the real problem here is that nobody wants to touch the idea of a national ID card. Americans find that whole notion anathema, and the reason that we're talking about, you know, spending billions and billions of dollars on the border is because nobody wants to implement the card.
I'm curious if there have been objection to a fence or a wall on the Mexican border before. What's different now in the matrix that makes it acceptable for Democrats that it hadn't been before?
Well, I think it's about whether or not you can get people from both parties to the table to compromise, do things. By definition, a compromise is going to be doing things that you may not necessarily want to do if you had your druthers. And you have a bipartisan group of 8 senators, each one taking a little bit of ideas from the other and trying to see where they can form a consensus. And if this is part of the consensus that gets us towards something that will move us away from a destructive conversation about immigration that, quite frankly, isn't advancing the country, something that potentially could cut the deficit by $200 billion, and also, quite frankly, you know, recognize something that Bill talked about. It doesn't matter whether or not you put up a wall or not. The American dream is an incredible attraction to a lot of people. People are going to come from all over the world, whether from the South or from elsewhere, and they have for 200 years, and they're going to continue to do so. We need to find a way to integrate them into our economy and into our society, because that's the only way, really, that you're going to see sustained economic growth.
You know, Andrew, I never thought that I would say this, and it's not in reference to this Bill O'Reilly, but the other Bill O'Reilly, the one that's on television every night. Republicans really need to listen to Mr. O'Reilly because he's right. Their future could be on the line with this. And, you know, it's good politics. It's good for the Latino community. It's good for the country. It's good for the economy. It's good for fighting the deficit. But all bets are off when it gets to the House. I don't care how many billion they add and how many walls they extend. When it gets to the House cannot be controlled. Boehner can't deliver the House. No one can deliver the House.
They just failed on the farm. They failed on the farm bill this year.
Right.
They can't deliver their members. The Republican Party is going through a national civil war of purging its moderates. With all due respect, Bill, it's a national conversation the party's having.
Great word there, civil war.
The thing is that both sides of the issue in the Republican Party are correct. I mean, the Republican Party needs to capitulate on this issue in order to survive. I agree with Bill O'Reilly. Agrees with Bill O'Reilly on that. But at the same extent, the Republicans that are standing up for principle on this, that illegal immigration is illegal, and that the rule of law has to rule in the country, are also correct. So basically, if the Republican Party is going to survive, it has to capitulate on the issue. I mean, that's just where we are. There's no great victory on either side in this. But both have good points. They have solid points.
Does passing immigration reform actually help the Republican Party? Will it actually get them Latino votes? Or is it just basically to stop the hemorrhaging and losing more votes to Democrats?
I think it'll help get Latino votes, not because the immigration bill passed, but because it's taken off the table. And then Republicans can speak to Latinos about things that we very much share in common. I mean, I was at a Latino Republican event in New York City last night. It was packed. It was absolutely jammed. Governor Fortuno from Puerto Rico was there. We had Geraldo Rivera there. But these are very strong family values. Working type people, Catholic voters that tend to skew Republican. Latino voters should be voting Republican in greater numbers, but we need to get this issue off the table.
It would not have delivered more Latino votes or Hispanic votes against this president, who's very popular with the Latino community. But it would stop the hemorrhaging, and it would make it possible for Latinos to come Republican, since they're basically much more conservative on social issues to begin with.
Whether or not I agree with Bill's underlying premise that Republican Party has a lot in common with Latino voters, I certainly agree with his premise that until you do something about immigration, Republicans can't even have the conversation with Latino voters.
Yeah. I'm just thinking of the Civil Rights Act in '64. Republicans led the opposition to that in Congress, and black voters haven't forgiven them really to this day if you look at in the split in black voting. I'm just wondering if the same thing wouldn't happen going forward with Latino voters after immigration.
I mean, it's the Civil Rights Bill. It's also, Harry Truman desegregating the military. It's Franklin Roosevelt starting to reach out to African American voters.
And Eisenhower, though, was very good as a Republican.
Absolutely, absolutely. And once upon a time, civil rights and certain other issues weren't deeply partisan. The problem is we're in such a polarized time, and quite frankly, guys like Bill and I certainly earn our living because we're in polarized time. But because we're in a polarized time, everything's viewed through a partisan prism. And it's going to take more than one piece of legislation that's going to undo the damage, just the same way that if every Republican voted to drastically expand civil rights for African Americans, one vote isn't going to change 50 years of policy.
Well, it sounds like this is all going to come to a head next week, or very well could. Monday, I think we're going to get the vote on the border security amendment, and we could get a vote on the overall package in the Senate by as early as Thursday, so you're going to want to stay tuned to RFL for that. Up next, are casinos a good or bad bet for New York? We may be on our way to allowing more gambling here in the Empire State. We're going to get into that debate and the latest developments out of a busy day in Albany next. Stay with us.